I never planned on telling this story. I told myself I'd take it to my grave, that silence would make it fade. But it hasn't faded. It lives with me. It moves with me. It sits beside me at dinner. It follows me to bed. It breathes between every word I say to the man I love. So I'm going to tell it exactly as it happened, not to excuse it, not to make it pretty, just to put it into words and stop pretending I don't hear it whispering every night. It was a Thursday, not a special Thursday, not an anniversary, not a birthday. Just one of those evenings when the world feels strangely soft and everything looks a little polished. We were meeting at a small restaurant, warm lights, linen napkins, a pianist in the corner playing songs everyone knew but no one could name. My boyfriend sat to my left. He smelled like cedar and rain. He always does. He ordered my favorite without asking, the soup I like, the wine I always pretend I can taste notes of berries in. Across from me sat his closest friend. I'd known him for a while. I thought I understood the edges of him. His dry jokes, his way of listening with his head slightly tilted, like he could hear the part you weren't saying. That night, his eyes looked different, clearer, or maybe I was looking too long, maybe both. Conversations braided themselves together. Work stories, travel plans, a silly argument about the best decade for music. We laughed. The laughter felt easy. And then there were the quiet seconds, those little gaps between a joke and the next breath, where I caught his friend watching me, not hungry, not aggressive, just present. I told myself I was imagining it. I turned back to my boyfriend, brushed my shoulder against his. He smiled without looking, that small smile of two people who know the choreography of each other's movements. Across the table, a glass tipped, a napkin folded. A fingertip traced the rim of a plate. Small things, smaller than small, but they hung in the air like notes you could almost hear. It happened when our hands reached for the same breadbasket. A harmless collision. Skin on skin for, what, half a second? But it was like knocking into a door you didn't know was there and feeling it swing open into a room you shouldn't enter. I pulled back. He did too. We both laughed in that polite, nothing to see here way. The pianist slipped into another song. I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I love my boyfriend. This is nothing. And yet, suddenly, every ordinary detail, the clink of cutlery, the slow sweep of a waiter's sleeve, the soft curve of candlelight on glass, felt like a drumbeat that only I could hear. He told a story about college, something about a road trip gone wrong, and a sunrise that made it worth it. I watched his mouth shape the punchline, and for no good reason, it felt like a secret meant only for me. I excused myself to the restroom. I needed a mirror to tell me I was being absurd. In the mirror, I looked exactly like myself. No change, no mark, no neon sign saying danger. When I came back, my boyfriend took my hand under the table. He squeezed twice, the way he always does when he's checking in without asking a question. I squeezed back, twice. I'm here. Across from me, his friend watched our hands, then looked up quickly, almost apologizing with his eyes. I looked away first, then the phone rang. It was my boyfriend's. The screen lit his face blue. He mouthed, "Work," and stood, kissed the top of my head, and stepped outside into the cool corridor that led to the street. The chair beside me sighed into the silence he left behind. The air changed temperature. Or maybe I did. We were suddenly, not a triangle, but a line, me and him facing each other like two lines that might eventually cross if no one drew a boundary. He leaned forward a little, not enough to be obvious, just enough for me to feel the gravity of it. "Do you like the wine?" he asked. The most ordinary question on earth. "It's nice," I said, and then my voice broke its own rule and added quietly, "Everything tonight feels too clear." He swallowed. "I know." Nothing more, no declarations, but something inside me stepped closer to the edge I'd promised myself I would never approach. I stood up to stretch. He did too. We both pretended we were just moving. The corridor to the restrooms and the service exit was narrow, washed in a gold light that made everything look softer. The pianist's song thinned to a hum. We didn't speak. We didn't touch. We walked like people who had misread the map and were only now realizing they were headed the wrong direction, and yet neither of us turned back. There's a corner by the service door. It's not romantic. A stack of folded tablecloths, a spray of eucalyptus in a tall vase to make the hallway seem intentional. The low buzz of a refrigerator, that's where we stopped. I could hear my own pulse. I remember the shape of his breath, not the taste, the shape. The way it landed between us like a coin tossed into water. He said, "If you tell me to go, I'll go." I could have said it. 3 words. Please. Go. Now, instead, I listened to the part of me that had been quiet for so long it had forgotten how to speak until that night. I didn't ask him to go. I want to be honest. There was no lightning, no music swelling, no cinematic perfection. There was just a decision that felt like slipping my hand from one warm pocket into another, knowing both belonged to the same coat. I stepped closer. He did too. We held that closeness like it might shatter the second we breathed too hard. And in that fragile, terrible closeness, we crossed a line. Not with words, not with poetry. With the simplest human surrender. I know this is wrong. I'm doing it anyway. It was brief. No fireworks, no promises. And yet it was enough to change the shape of every room I've walked into since. I went back first. I couldn't feel my legs. My hands were calm, absurdly calm, folding the napkin into a smaller square, and then smaller still, like I could tidy the chaos by making something neat. My boyfriend returned a minute later, apologizing for the call, smiling at me as if I were the safest place he knew. His friend arrived last. He sat down, picked up his glass, and said something about the pianist being better than last time. Normal words, normal tone. I answered in the language of normal, fluent as ever. We finished dinner. We walked out into the night. The city had not noticed what we had done. Of course it hadn't. Cities have seen worse. In the car, My boyfriend put on the playlist we always play when we're tired and full and happy. I stared at the blur of lights on the windshield and reached for his hand. I thought, if I hold it tight enough, maybe I can hold on to the person I was before. He squeezed back, that same two-beat reassurance. I almost cried from the tenderness of it, from how unbroken it felt in his hands, how intact, while inside me something had cracked. At home, I showered for too long, not to erase anything. Water can't do that, but to slow time down enough that I could arrange my face into the right order before I came out. We watched an episode of a show we were half committed to. We argued about whether the main character was selfish or just scared. I said scared. He said selfish. I wanted to tell him everything in that moment. I wanted to open my mouth and let the night fall out. Instead, I said, "I'm tired." We turned off the lights. I lay awake, listening to the soft clicks of the heater, counting my breaths like steps in a corridor that had no door at the end. In the morning, I made coffee. My hands remembered how, even though I felt like a stranger inside my own body, my phone lit up with a message, not from him, from him. It said, "We should never talk about last night." I stared at the sentence. It was a mercy and a sentence at the same time. I typed, "Agreed." Then I deleted it. Then I typed, "Yes." I pressed send. I put my phone face down. I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't look at it again. I wasn't. For days, then weeks, we lived inside the quiet pact. We saw each other at gatherings, birthdays, game nights, group hikes, where the conversation hopped from person to person like stones in a river. We didn't speak about that. We didn't let our eyes say more than our mouths allowed. I learned how to be exact with my gaze. Never too warm, never too cold, like adjusting a thermostat in a room that could easily freeze or burn. Sometimes he would make a joke that landed perfectly, and everyone would laugh, and my laugh would sound just like theirs. Sometimes my boyfriend would lean into me and whisper, "You okay?" And I would say, "Of course." And sometimes I would go to the bathroom, lock the door, and press my palms to my ribs and think, "You did this. You did this." Guilt is not a storm. It's a slow tide. It takes little pieces of shoreline day after day, and one morning, you wake to find the fence you built is standing in the water. I became careful, too careful. I scheduled my tenderness like appointments. Kiss here, laugh here, ask about his day here. I thought if I could be a perfect partner, I might earn back the part of me I had given away for nothing but a moment that already felt distant and too real at once. Perfection isn't love, it's theater, and I was performing. One Sunday we were cooking, chopping vegetables, moving around each other in that dance couples learn, the one where the kitchen gets small and the touch on the lower back says, "Behind you." He told me a story his mother had told him about regret, about how she believed it was better to make one brave mistake than to live a life of small, careful almosts. I stood very still. The knife hovered over the cutting board like a pause. "Do you agree?" he asked. I opened my mouth. The truth stood at the threshold. "I think," I said slowly, "that some mistakes are only brave if you are the only person who will bleed." He looked at me for a long time. I looked at the tomatoes. We didn't fall apart. We didn't explode. We went on dates. We saw movies. We argued about dishes and drift and budgets. We took photos that looked like happiness because most of it was. He was kind to me in 1,000 tiny ways. That's the part I need to say out loud. He was kind. The kindness made the guilt heavier, like rain on a coat. Sometimes I wanted him to be cruel so I could be angry instead of ashamed. He never was. There was a day, months later, at a friend's barbecue. Laughter, music, paper plates bending under the weight of too much food. His friend and I ended up by the cooler, alone for the first time since that night. He handed me a drink without looking directly at me and said, "How are you?" "Fine," I said, the most dishonest, efficient word. He nodded. "I think about it," he said, barely audible under the noise of the party. "Not with longing, with responsibility." I swallowed. "Me too." We both stepped back from the conversation at exactly the same time, like we'd rehearsed it. Far enough to be safe, not so far that it looked like running. People will ask, maybe you are asking now, why I didn't confess to my boyfriend. I asked myself every day. I stood in front of the truth, like someone at the edge of a pool who can't tell whether the water is shallow or bottomless. What I know is this: confession heals the speaker and wounds the listener. Sometimes that is the necessary medicine, and sometimes it's a selfish relief. I chose not to hand him my guilt so I could feel lighter. Maybe you think that was cowardice. Maybe you're right. All I can tell you is, I made that choice and I live inside it. Here is what stayed. I love him. I wake up and I love him. I make coffee and I love him. I trip over his shoes and I love him. Here is what changed. I know what I am capable of. And it is not only the good things. I used to think love was a guarantee against certain kinds of mistakes. It isn't. It's a light. It helps you see the edge. It does not move the edge. I'm more careful now, not in the performative way, but in the way you become careful after you've touched a hot pan. You still cook. You just remember heat is real. I wrote a letter to his friend once. I never sent it. It said, "I don't hate you. I don't want you. I don't regret you. I regret myself. Thank you for not forcing our secret into a story with chapters. Thank you for leaving it as a page torn out and thrown away." I folded the letter and put it in a book I hadn't finished. Weeks later, I opened the book and the letter fell out like a leaf. I burned it over the sink. The smoke smelled like nothing. I have been back to that restaurant. Once. The pianist was different. The eucalyptus was replaced by dried lavender. The corner still existed. Corners always do. I sat with my boyfriend at a different table. We ordered the soup and the wine. We talked about a trip we might take. At some point, he reached for the breadbasket and our fingers brushed. The same warmth, the same ease. I felt something inside me steady, like a picture frame finally straight on the wall. If I could speak to the me from that night, I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't shame her. Shame already did what it does. I would say, "You are not a monster. You are not a hero. You are not a tragic poem. You are a human being who made a choice in a small corridor of golden light. Live with it fully. Learn from it honestly. Do not make it a religion you worship or a wound you keep open to feel alive. Choose better next time. There will be a next time. Not the same situation, but another edge. Choose better. Was it love? Number. It was temptation dressed in the costume of inevitability. It looked like fate because it arrived at the exact moment the door was ajar. Love is what I do every day when I show up with my imperfect heart and my open hands. Love is the long work, the soft work, the stubborn work. What happened in that corner was not love. It was a moment. Moments can be loud enough to drown out entire symphonies, but the symphony is still there when the moment ends. I'm telling you because secrets rot in the dark. They don't disappear. They become the shape of your shadow, and you start mistaking your shadow for yourself. Saying it aloud doesn't absolve me. It just puts the shadow on the table where I can see it and say, "You're not driving anymore." Maybe you needed to hear someone say that. Maybe I did. If my boyfriend ever hears this, if your ears ever find these words, know this: I loved you before that night. I loved you during it in a way that makes no sense, and I have loved you after, with a tenderness that is more honest because it does not pretend I am flawless. You didn't fail me. I failed myself, and I am trying every day to be someone who would not fail you again. We are all a collection of rooms we've entered and left, doors we've opened, corners we've stood in too long. I stood in one. I crossed a line. I carry it. But I am more than that night. I am the mornings after, and the choices since, and the hands I hold with intention now. That is my confession, not for sympathy, not for spectacle, just to say, this is what happened, and this is who I am, still learning how to be better in the light.